All right, let's kick off another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking regenerative ranching, but with a bit of a twist.
Oh,
Yeah, we're focusing on goats.
okay,
We're going to
interesting.
be breaking down this video from the Noble Research Institute, and they decided to add, get this, 500 goats to their operation.
Wow, that's quite a herd.
It is. And it's all part of their regenerative practices.
I'm intrigued. Goats aren't usually the first thing that spring to mind with, ranching.
Right, but they're proving to be these amazing little land management powerhouses.
Well, I'm ready to learn.
So the video starts off by talking about a problem a lot of ranchers have to deal with, brush encroachment.
Yeah, that can be a real pain, especially for those working with native grasslands.
Exactly. And the Noble Research Institute, they're using this mix of methods to combat it. They've got mechanical removal, they're using chemical treatments in some cases, and then goats.
Goats, so like targeted grazing.
You got it. After they do that initial clearing, the goats come in and kind of act like this maintenance crew, making sure that brush doesn't just creep right back in.
That's pretty smart, using nature to work for you, in a way.
Yeah, and the rancher in the video, he actually says there's nothing easy about goats. But you can tell he really enjoyed the challenge.
Huh, I bet. It's like a puzzle, finding how they fit into the whole system, right?
Definitely. And they're effective, too. Apparently, they can clear up to like 60% of the brush in an area.
Wow, that's impressive. And I imagine it makes a big difference, both for the ecology and the rancher's bottom line.
Oh, absolutely. Plus, beyond just the brush clearing, think about all that manure they're dropping as they wander around.
Ah, right. Natural fertilizer. It's like having a whole team of little fertilizer spreaders going across the land.
Exactly. It's all about working with what nature provides.
So did they just start with 500 goats? Or,
Oh, no, definitely not.
yeah.
The video talks about how they actually started with a much smaller herd, like 20 goats,
Hmm.
and gradually worked their way up over time.
That makes a lot more sense. I bet there was a pretty steep learning curve for everyone involved.
I can only imagine. And there's this really interesting bit where they talk about how weaning their calves actually helped with training the goats.
Really? How so?
So weaning time means the calves have to learn about electric fences, to keep them where they need to be.
Right, they have to learn the hard way not to touch those.
Exactly. And it just so happened that their goat training was going on at the same time. So the calves and the goats were kind of learning together.
Haha, what a coincidence. That's pretty clever, though, making the most of the situation.
It is. Now, shifting gears a bit, I'm curious, how do goats actually compare to, say, cattle in how they graze and impact the land?
Well, the rancher in the video uses this example of a 10-acre paddock. Cattle, they might be able to graze that for a day, maybe two max.
Okay, so not very long.
No. But goats, because they're browsers, they're much more selective in what they eat. So they can actually graze that same 10 acres for much, much longer.
Interesting. So it's not just about eating everything in sight.
Nope. They're targeting those specific plants, the brush, the weeds, while leaving the grasses to flourish, which then means the land can support more cattle grazing later on.
It's like a win-win. The goats get what they need, and the land benefits in the long run.
Precisely. And it creates this better balance in the vegetation overall.
Makes sense. But okay, I gotta ask, 500 goats? That's a lot of thirsty mouths to feed.
Absolutely. So they actually installed this massive 2,000-gallon water tank.
Wow, that's huge.
And to make it even better, it's all powered by solar energy.
Oh, very cool. So they're really committed to those sustainability practices.
They are. But even with the best tech, there are always going to be hiccups.
Like what?
Well, the rancher mentions they've had to troubleshoot the solar panels and batteries a few times. It
I
happens.
bet. But hey, they figured it out right.
Yep. It just goes to show, regenerative ranching, it's all about problem solving and adapting.
And speaking of problem solving, let's not forget about those who are keeping these goats safe. The guardian dogs.
Ah, yes, the canine security detail. There's Maverick, and then Thelma and Louise.
Love those names.
They've got a tough job making sure those 500 goats are protected from any predators that might come sniffing around.
Especially with a herd that big, I can only imagine.
Right. And get this, there's this funny story in the video about Thelma and Louise. They decided they were going to go guard the weaned calves, even though those calves were miles away from the rest of the goats.
Seriously?
Yep. Just decided to go off on their own little adventure.
Those are some independent ladies.
Hmm.
But hey, maybe that's why they're so good at their job.
Could be. They're not afraid to think for themselves. But the rancher also really stresses how important it is that the dogs are bonded, not just with each other, but with the goats too.
Yeah, I bet that creates a much stronger sense of, like, pack mentality.
Exactly. It helps make sure all the goats are looking out for each other and the dogs know who belongs and who doesn't.
So it's like this whole interconnected system. Speaking of interconnected, remember earlier when the rancher said, there's nothing easy about goats?
Ugh.
Well, it sounds like fencing is one of those not so easy things, especially with a dry climate like theirs.
What happened?
So, because the ground was so dry, when the goats touched the electric fence, they weren't grounding out properly.
Oh, I see. So they weren't getting zapped.
Exactly. So the fence was basically useless, and the goats knew it.
Clever little escape artists.
They are. So they had to find a way to make that fence hot again.
How did they do that?
They got this portable, solar-powered fence charger. Super simple solution, but it did the trick.
Sometimes the simplest things are the most effective.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show that with goats, you always got to be prepared to adapt and find creative solutions.
Makes sense. They're smart, curious creatures. You got to stay one step ahead.
Exactly. But, it's not all challenges and fences. There are some really cool benefits to having goats in the mix, too.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And the Noble Research Institute, they're all about sharing what they're learning, which is awesome.
It is. They're showing that regenerative ranching, it's not just some fad. It's backed by real science and data.
That's so important because then other ranchers who are thinking about trying something similar can learn from their experiences.
Right, and it's not just about keeping the knowledge to themselves either. The rancher actually mentions that they're thinking about moving their goats to other ranches to help with brush management.
Oh, like a traveling goat herd.
Exactly.
That's a great idea. It builds this network of support within the ranching community.
Yeah, and it really emphasizes that interconnectedness. It's not just about what happens on one property. It's about how those choices impact the whole surrounding landscape.
I like that, a more collaborative approach to land management.
And it goes beyond just brush control, too. Did you know goats can actually play a role in wildfire prevention?
Wait, really?
Yeah,
All right.
because they eat all that underbrush. It helps to reduce the amount of fuel that's available for a fire to spread.
That's fascinating. So they're like little firefighters in a way.
They are. Who knew goats could be so multi-talented? But beyond their ecological contributions, there's also the potential for, goat-based products.
Ah, right. Goat cheese, goat meat, even fiber like mohair and cashmere.
Exactly. And those products can bring in new revenue streams for the ranchers, diversifying their income.
It's a reminder that goats aren't just tools, they're also a source of sustenance and economic opportunity.
Absolutely. So this whole deep dive, it's really been eye-opening for me. It seems like goats have the potential to change the way we think about ranching.
I agree. They're adaptable, they offer all these ecological benefits, and they can even be profitable. It's a compelling case for integrating them into regenerative agriculture.
But like anything in ranching, it's not without its challenges.
Of course. Goats, they need careful management, they can be
Right.
escape artists, their dietary needs are different from cattle, and so on.
It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all approach. You need to understand their behavior, be willing to adapt, and always be learning.
Absolutely. And speaking of learning, let's turn to our listeners for a minute. If you could ask the ranchers from the Noble Research Institute just one question about their experience with goats, what would it be?
I love that. I've been thinking about that myself. I'm really curious to hear what advice they would give to other ranchers who are thinking about adding goats to their operations.
Me too. Like, what are some of the things they wish they knew before they started? What were the biggest hurdles they had to overcome?
Right. Because their journey, with all the mistakes and triumphs along the way, that's valuable knowledge that could help others.
Definitely. It shows that regenerative ranching, it's this ongoing learning process, always experimenting, adapting, collaborating.
And who better to learn from than those who are paving the way and showing us just how transformative goats can be in the world of regenerative ranching.
Exactly. Their experience is a real source of inspiration for others looking to take a similar path. Yeah, it really shows how resourceful they are, figuring things out as they go.
And the fact that they're putting all this out there for others to learn from, that's huge.
It is. It takes it from just being some trendy concept to something grounded in, real science and data.
Right. And it gives other ranchers the information they need if they want to try incorporating goats themselves.
Exactly. Like, hey, this is what worked for us. This is what we learned. Maybe it'll help you too.
And speaking of sharing, the rancher even mentions that they're considering taking their goat herd to other ranches to help with brush management.
Wait, really? So like a traveling goat herd?
Yep,
That's such a cool idea. It's like a collaborative effort almost.
it is. And it emphasizes that interconnectedness we were talking about. What happens on one ranch can have ripple effects on the whole surrounding area.
Definitely. By working together, they can create a more sustainable landscape overall.
And it's not just about brush control either. The video mentions that goats can even play a role in wildfire prevention.
Oh, wow. How so?
Well, because they eat all that underbrush, it helps to reduce the amount of fuel that's available for a fire to spread.
Ah, that makes sense. So they're like little firefighters in a way.
Exactly. Who knew goats could be so multi-talented? And beyond their ecological contributions, there's also the potential for, goat-based
Oh,
products.
right. Like goat cheese, goat meat, even fiber like mohair and cashmere.
Yep. And those products can bring in additional income for the ranchers, which is always a good thing.
It's true. It's like they're getting multiple benefits from having the goats around.
Definitely. This whole deep dive has been so insightful for me. I had no idea how much potential goats had.
Me neither. They're way more versatile than I ever realized.
But as with any ranching practice, I'm sure it's not all sunshine and roses.
Oh, of course not. Goats definitely require careful management. They can be escape artists, and their dietary needs are different from cattle.
So it's not as simple as just throwing them out there and letting them roam free.
Exactly. You need to really understand their behavior and be willing to adapt your practices to suit their needs.
Speaking of learning, let's go back to that question we posed to our listeners. If you could ask the ranchers from the Noble Research Institute just one question about their experience with goats, what would it be?
That's a good one. I think I'd ask them what advice they would give to other ranchers who are considering incorporating goats into their operations.
Oh, that's a great question. It would be so valuable to hear their insights, the things they wish they knew before they started.
Yeah, like what were some of the biggest challenges they faced and how did they overcome them?
Right, because those lessons learned, that's gold for anyone who's thinking about going down a similar path.
It really highlights the importance of sharing knowledge and experiences within the regenerative agriculture community.
And who better to learn from than those who are out there on the front lines, showing us what's possible with goats and regenerative ranching.
Exactly. Their journey can be a real source of inspiration for others.
Welcome back. We've been on quite the goat adventure, haven't we?
We have. From brush management to soil health to wildfire prevention. Who knew these little guys were so impactful?
And let's not forget the products. Cheese, meat, fiber. It's like they're the Swiss Army knife of the ranch.
I like that. And you know what really struck me about the ranchers in the video is their openness to trying new things.
Yeah, they weren't afraid to think outside the box and really embrace those regenerative practices.
Exactly, and that willingness to experiment, to adapt, that's crucial for regenerative agriculture as a whole.
It is. It's all about working with nature, finding those solutions that benefit both the land and the operation.
And sharing those solutions too. Remember they talked about creating that network of ranchers supporting each other?
Oh, yeah. That idea of a traveling goat herd going from ranch to ranch, tackling brush and spreading knowledge as they go, it's brilliant.
It is, and it really shows how interconnected everything is. What happens on one ranch can impact the whole region.
Absolutely. And as more consumers become aware of where their food comes from and how it's produced, I think regenerative practices like these are going to become even more important.
I agree. People are looking for food that's not only delicious, but also produced ethically and sustainably.
Exactly. And regenerative agriculture, with its focus on soil health, biodiversity, and animal welfare, ticks all those boxes.
It does. It's a win-win for everyone involved, ranchers, consumers, and the planet itself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of goats and regenerative ranching, I'm left with a sense of hope and excitement for the future.
Me too. It's inspiring to see how ranchers are leading the way, showing us that we can produce food in a way that nourishes both people and the planet.
And who knows, maybe goats will play an even bigger role in that future than we ever imagined.
I wouldn't be surprised. They've already proven to be far more capable and valuable than many people realize.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive.
It's been a fascinating journey.
Until next time, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, and keep those minds open to new possibilities.
And remember, the future of agriculture is in our hands.
Happy listening, everyone.